Hi guys, welcome to the stream. Tonight we have a stream hosted by WorkingMouse with Geordie and Kelly on their talk about building software with quality and speed. Geordie and Kelly, on to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for having us. So yes, we're from WorkingMouse and we're going to do this talk tonight on building software. So let's crack right into it. We're going to talk tonight a bit about who WorkingMouse is, what our way of working is, the tech that underpins everything we do, and then a bit about our culture. But first, a little bit about us. So I'm Geordie and I'm the head of product success at WorkingMouse, which I'm going to tell you a bit more about shortly, but I'm heavily involved in the scoping and designing of all of the applications we build. So I've been with WorkingMouse for 3 years now, since I graduated I did a Bachelor of Business and Fine Arts at QUT. And when I first started with WorkingMouse, I was a UX designer. And since then, I very quickly became a squad lead, so the lead of our development teams, which gave me a lot of experience in IT that I didn't really have from my fine arts degree. But now I've moved into the head of product success, so really focused on the scoping and designing of our projects. And with me, I've got Kelly. So he's a solution architect who's been with us for probably almost 4 years now. And you probably recognize him from around your campus because he's been studying software engineering and is this close to finishing, Kelly?
Yep, that close for the last 2 years.
So Kelly has, he's been a software developer with us and has also transitioned into that squad lead role for a time. And has now actually, this is quite scandalous news, he's actually moved into our codebots team in the last week or so. But he is one of our most long-standing WorkingMouse legends, I'll call him. So what is WorkingMouse? We're a software design and development company that works with customers to digitally transform their businesses. But you may have heard of us before because we've always had a bit of a relationship with UQ. And in the past, we've especially found some great talent with the UQCS community. And we primarily develop web and mobile applications, but we also supply some marketing static websites for any of our clients that require them. So I'll pull up a few of our clients shortly, but we've had experience in a range of different industries. We've worked with government organizations, large enterprises, and some really early startups as well. So I thought I'd give you some quick facts to give it a bit of a history. We were founded back in 2013 by our fearless leader, Eben, who you can see is also a massive Star Wars fan. He realized that there had to be a better way of developing software. And at this point, he was working out of iLabs. So that's when the dream started. He'd previously completed his PhD in model-driven engineering at UQ as well, which has heavily influenced the technology we use today, and which is the codebots platform. So Kelly's going to give you a demo of how we build using it very soon. But WorkingMouse was launched as a services business for a couple of reasons. And that's to fund the development of the codebots platform, but more importantly, to be the first users of the codebots technology and prove that it really does help us build with quality and speed. And we've used it to build every application we've built so far over the years. But in 2016, we moved into our office on Hawken Drive, which being UQ students, I'm sure you've all walked up to either the IGA or Kai Kai Chicken. Is that still there? I don't know, but it was a good time for a lot of us. We grew to about 30 people in this office, which you can see it got pretty cramped. And looking back at these photos, it makes me feel very COVID unsafe, but it was definitely a good time. The white table that you can see there was our lunch table as well as our meeting table with clients. So there was always a lot of cleanup. that had to happen before we could invite clients into the office. I think this office or this space is now being used as the internet or gaming cafe. So I'm not sure if they can cram as many people as we did in there, but I'd like to see them try. Now we moved to Milton in 2018, and we're currently located next to the train station on Park Road. And you can tell that we've clearly made it big in this photo, because in the top you can see that we can tell the time across Brisbane, Singapore and London. So top that. WorkingMouse alone now has 32 employees. And then in our company group, we've got 70 in total. So we're all in this same office together. And that is the East Cottage Industries family or company group that we work with. So we've got codebots, which is the platform, the technology that I mentioned earlier. Then we've got us, WorkingMouse, the services business, and also Rogue 2, which is our support company that deals with our DevOps and supports and maintains our clients' platforms. And most important fact is that we love a good murder mystery party, and we like to dress up and have a good time. So we've done like Star Wars, we've done a disco theme, we've done the Wild Wild West, pirates, 1920s. I don't know what's next, but it's probably pandemic related, I would say. Isaac, our resident D&D chief and also just creative master, comes up with these awesome plots that we always have to play by, and yeah, it's always a good time. So what do we actually do? I thought I would step through our phases that we're normally in day to day. So our brief process, every client project starts out going through brief. It's a meeting between us and potential clients to discover what their problem statement is, so what they want to build, and what we'll be solving essentially. This is normally our account managers and our product success team members who are in those meetings early on. Then we move into scope, which once a client signs on from brief to scope, we hold a lot of meetings with them over a 2 to 4 week period, and it's a real deep dive into that problem statement that we defined earlier. But essentially we are designing the solution that the developers are about to build. We have product designers and product developers in these scoping meetings along with the clients. Then we move into development. So after scope has been completed and we have a list of tickets and requirements that are ready to build, we pass the projects on to our development teams. And our development phase can take anywhere from 5 to 20 weeks. But we also work with the Department of Defence, which has been an ongoing client with us for 3 years, which is awesome to have. Then finally, we have support. So as I mentioned earlier, we pass on to our Rogue 2 team, and they support and maintain our clients from there on until our clients want to come back for another development iteration, which we would scope and develop again, and the cycle goes around. So our past clients, I just thought I'd pick out a couple. As I said earlier, we work across a huge range of industries, which is pretty awesome because you get to become little subject matter experts on every kind of project that you do. This is one I worked on, and it's a accessible holiday booking system, because out there, I'm sure you've noticed that if a place might say that they're wheelchair friendly, but perhaps that's just a ramp to get into the front. But it doesn't consider how these people get into the shower or get into their bed or have a great holiday. So that's what this system is all about, which is an awesome opportunity to work on that. Then we've worked with Alley Tracks, which is a tracking system that we built. We built this device, an application that goes onto a mobile phone that sits in a race car, and it detects whether the driver has had a spin, crash or stop. So it essentially helps race control to respond to any accidents quicker than they usually would. It's mainly for hobbyists that are going out to take their incredible cars to a racetrack so that they can take care of these guys better. Then we've also got Milton Island Adventures. So we built their ferry booking system, so you can book cars and trucks and passenger tickets on here. So they're kind of like a broad range of industries that we've worked in, and also different sizes of businesses as well. Suzanne Stays was a startup just getting off the ground, whereas obviously the Milton Island Ferry has been around for 20 odd years at least. So we do different things slightly with depending on how our clients or where our clients are in their business, but the crux of the scoping process is still pretty similar. So after years of building all of these client projects, we've collected our fair share of battle scars, and we've made a lot of learnings. But what we've done with all of those things is created our way of working. And the way of working is literally a book that everyone has on their desk. I've got mine with me. And it's essentially a Bible of all of the aspects of our process to ensure that every project going from brief all the way through to scope receives a consistent and efficient experience, essentially. But we've also found that it's a really great tool for our clients to use as well, because quite often it is their first time developing software. So it's a foreign process for them to go through, and it's a really great tool to help them understand each phase that we're going through and documents why each of these things are important. So what I've done here is I'm just going to go through a few slides, and I've just pulled out the parts that will probably be most relevant to this audience. I'm a designer personally, and Kelly's a developer, so our main concerns are when we scope and when we develop. So here, this scoping process, we obviously come in and we want to understand what the client's problem is, and we do that by looking at the different users that are involved, and we do some research there. Then we want to observe these users, so we go out and conduct user interviews, and we sort of map out a list of jobs to be done and what those users want to do on a platform like what we're building. Then we want to ideate, which is always my favorite phase, because you get to just sketch, wireframe, and kind of go crazy on all these different areas of brainstorming and ideas that you have. And then we come in and refine it into a prototype. So that's when we use tools like Adobe XD or InVision to literally mock up what the whole platform is going to look like. And when we showcase it to clients, we hand it over. We always have a full stories backlog. So each requirement will meet a different, well, we've got a definition of ready for development, so that each ticket has to meet that, which means it's got to have a description on it, but it's got to have user acceptance criteria, and it's got to have a prototype screen matching it. Then we estimate on that, which I'm sure a few of you would have experience in, is quite often the hardest thing to do. But we have a estimation process that we go through that really helps us provide accurate estimations, or as accurate as we can get to clients. And then we map out everything on a roadmap for them as well. The scoping team that's involved in this process are our product success team members. And we've got a range of designers and developers in the product success team, but for each scope that is done, we grab a product designer and a product developer to go in together and spend these scoping sessions with our clients to form the solution in the end. And as I mentioned before, the core deliverables of scope is that prototype, the product backlog, and also our model, so the schema, which is where codebots comes in. And the development process, so our dev process is it's based off an agile methodology. So we go through and we have our core ceremonies, planning sessions, development with daily huddle, Then we have a retrospective and a review session with the client, and so forth. So we break our projects or milestones into iterations, and we typically build for about 2 weeks at a time before we release that iteration to beta. The development team that's involved, we call them squads. So squads are broken up generally into 2 pods, and each pod has 2 web engineers in them. And so each pod could be working on a separate project or on the same project. But your squad lead will do all of the Scrum, will lead you through the Scrum process essentially, and help you perform those ceremonies together. And the core deliverables from development, I suppose, is just releasing that software from your development environment through to beta, getting those UATs approved by clients, and then releasing into production. So our technology, which is where I'm going to throw over to Kelly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Geordie. Let me just get this slide up and running. Okie dokie. Thank you. Okay, so technology. So I'm going to be talking about more of our software, our tooling, and our processes that we've been using within WorkingMouse and within codebots as well. I'd like to mention I have seen a couple of questions pop up through on the chat. We will probably leave them right until the very end, just to make this flow a little bit nicer being a live stream. So I'm going to dive into, like I said, my favorite subject, which is the tech. The primary subject of this will be our use of codebots and how codebots helps WorkingMouse deliver both quality and deliver faster for our clients. And if I'm feeling lucky, I will even have a crack at doing a live demo on the codebots platform. So first things first is what is codebots? Some of you may be familiar with the technology or the term. Well, it's been hanging around UQCS for a little bit. But what is it actually when you get down to it? In the simplest terms, it is a collection of software robots that write a whole heap of code for us to make sure we can write more code faster. What it really is, when you get a little bit deeper, is it's a very special implementation of a software development methodology called model-driven development. For those who aren't super familiar with the term, or you may have heard it as model-driven engineering, it essentially comes down to the use of a domain model, so a very specific model that's been designed and developed to match a particular use case or a particular application, and using that model to represent an abstraction of the application itself. So at the end of the day, some of your models could be really simple. You may have seen them when you see open API standards that can then produce API endpoints. That is all model-driven development. So what codebots is, like I said, is it takes this idea and it supercharges it. And that comes down to the codebots methodology. So typically in software development, as some of you may be familiar, is you go through that scoping and that planning stage, you develop your backlog of requirements, you develop your entity diagram, your designs, your security rules, as well as your business case. And then that gets handed over to the development team. What typically happens once it's handed over to the development team, if you're lucky, is they pick that up and then they go with it. And as time progresses, that documentation that you develop during that scoping gradually gets more and more stale and less relevant as the software requirements change over time. And what you end up with at the end is your original design document, which is typically just that, a document, no longer reflects the applications that's delivered at the end. What codebots does to help resolve this problem is it actually does a very tight coupling of a lot of those design artifacts that you come out with in that initial planning stage with the code itself. So in that scope, as Geordie mentioned earlier, we'd go through it as we're developing our backlog of requirements. and our entity diagram, we would actually use the codebots platform to create these artifacts, which then has a one-to-one relationship to the actual code produced in our development cycles. So as you change your design documents, your code changes underneath, which means you get that tight coupling and that high, that synchronization between the two. As you can see in this diagram, the codebots platform actually produces roughly on average around 92% of an application that we develop, which leaves the extra 8% for the special sauce, as we like to call it, the really intelligent, the really creative stuff that myself as a developer love doing, rather than that really boring pattern hole punching sort of work. So one of the big important things, I do apologize for this diagram, it looked a little bit better before. One of the big key things with the codebot, of course, is as you develop the model, you want the code produced to actually match what you would have done yourself, if not better. The way that works is all of our codebots are actually developed or trained up using what we call a reference implementation. So a reference implementation is a team of developers or a single developer actually writing the initial version or a version of the solution themselves using normal development processes. That goes through the normal code review processes, your normal testing processes. And once everybody's happy with the architectural design and the solution, we then train the bots up on that solution so that they can produce it every time. You can't really see it all that well in this diagram, but we continually evolve the actual bots themselves. So as new requirements come along, we actually come to a decision point where we decide whether or not it is a repeatable pattern that could be used across multiple applications. If the answer is yes, we create a reference implementation, we abstract it into the codebots technology, and then Bob's your uncle. If it's not, if it is a one-off solution that only works for the single application we're developing, we then make those changes ourselves alongside the bot written code and then commit it up and done. So now that I've given you a little bit of a background on what codebots as the technology is itself, you may have heard the term, or Geordie did mention the term a couple of times, the codebots platform. And the question is, what is the codebots platform and how is it different from codebots? The big key difference here is purely the platform is a platform as a service that actually gives you access to the bots themselves. As you can see in this diagram as well, you've got your typical steps in your development process, your plan, your build, your test, and your launch, and they're all integrated within the platform itself. Each of these are incredibly important. There's various tools for some of these out there. For example, planning would mirror what you might use Jira for, but the build and the test are the real special sauce that allows you to interact with the bots directly. So as far as the actual technology that the bots produce, so the bots that I'll be demonstrating today, or the bots that we use in all of our new projects, are actually our third generation codebots. So they're based upon a .NET, so a C# server side and a React client side stack for one pairing, and then a Java Spring and an Angular client side for the second. So there's two pairings, two sets of bots there. Earlier bots, so one of the bots that the actual platform itself is written using is LampBot. It's one of the, that's our second generation codebot. Isn't available on the platform, but it has given us a really good platform to build upon, and all the learnings from creating that second generation bot have fed forwards into these new, faster, more modern technologies. So each of the new bots, and same with the generation 2 LampBot, follow the same classical structure. So this isn't something special to codebots. This is common software principles applied across for consistency. So you got your N-tier architecture with your client side and your server side. You've got your service layer, your data source, and your various layers in between. This should look quite familiar for anyone who's actually had a crack at developing their own applications using whatever technologies, and it is transferable across technology stacks, whether or not you're using Python, Java, or .NET. So what I might do now is, fingers crossed, pray to the demo gods, I might actually flip across to codebots platform itself and give you a little bit of a demo on how those concepts that I was talking about actually work in practice. Cool. So what I've got here in front of me right now is the actual codebots platform. So this is my site dashboard. So the way WorkingMouse works with various clients and codebots is, as we onboard a new client during the scoping process, we actually create them or get them to create themselves an account on codebots. What that gives them is their own site. The site is how we do our multi-tenancy across different clients, with each site having all of its data contained within itself. So that way clients have their privacy and their IP protected. What I've got here is actually just a demo site. So you'll see a variety of different applications sitting up at the top. And you can see you've 3 main sections of the platform along the top here. So we've got our platform, which is where we do our development, planning, and testing part of that lifecycle. Got our library, which is our documentation phase of that lifecycle. And then, of course, one of the more important parts, I believe, is our academy, which is our training side of that lifecycle. I will quickly switch between the library and the academy to give you a brief summary of what you can actually do and what they're used for. Starting with the academy. So at WorkingMouse, when we onboard a new developer onto our teams, or if we are onboarding someone else or helping someone else onboard onto codebots, this is the first port of call. So if I scroll down a little bit, you can actually see we've got a variety of different qualifications you can complete on the platform. And these qualifications range from how to use the platform itself, as well as learning guides on the individual target technology stacks. So you'll have details on how to complete various tasks in Angular, or various tasks in React or C# or Spring, all available within the Academy, and you can work through these qualifications. Of course, the Academy only covers the more formal part of the education process. For actual specific application level documentation, we make use of the library. And the library is just a knowledge base. Some people here may have used other knowledge bases in the past, such as Notion is a great one that I have used personally, as well as Confluence, among others. This is a great place where we just document all of the details about our individual applications, or on a higher level across our various different apps as well. Various books are just categorizations of these particular articles. Now, for that, I might move on to my favorite part now, of course, which is coming back to the platform here, which is our building our applications. So landing on this for the first time, first thing I want to do is click Create Application. We do support legacy migrations if you have an existing Access database you want to migrate the schema from, but I find I'm almost always creating a custom app. Like I said, our 2 tech stacks, I'm going to be picking Springbot and give it a very simple name. I'm going to call this UQCS 2 because I've actually prepared one earlier. And we'll let this do its thing. Wonderful. Since I'm the only one working on this at this point, I'm going to now start building my application. And I land on an empty entity diagram. So those models that I was talking about earlier translate on the codebots platform into 3 distinct diagrams. You've got your entity diagram, moving across, you've got your user interface diagram, and then finally, one of the most important, I believe, would most definitely be our security diagram, where we define our access between the different entities. In the entity diagram, I might create a very simple app right now. So maybe one of the examples we use in some of the documentation is our fish fanatics application, because I'm a fish fanatic. I'm going to add a couple of entities to my diagram. First one is going to be a fish. This is my fish, a tank, and species. So what this diagram actually represents is, in the tech terms, it would be a domain-specific language developed for the codebots technology. What that actually means in practice is it allows us to evolve the codebots. We can actually evolve the properties that we can define for each of the bots. For example, clicking on an entity, we have descriptions, we have an available by property, creatable, deletable, order by directions, among a variety of other features. And we can evolve those, and we do evolve those as we evolve the bots themselves. Now I've got my 3 primary entities. I'm going to add some attributes. Keeping with being simple, I'm just going to give a name to each of these. And you'll notice that the attributes actually have different properties again to the entities in the sense we can add constraints like uniqueness. We can also make it indexable so we can search it later. Once we've got names, we may want to add a validator. This is client-side and server-side validation. So this will work through any APIs as well as any forms that codebots produce. And then adding relationships between our entities. So a fish, we might want to add one tank has many fish, one of many, and a species has also many fish. Each of these, again, we can add additional constraints or remove them. For the purpose of this, I'm going to remove my optional constraints to actually allow you to create a fish and a species without creating the opposite of that relationship. Looking across, I now have populated my security diagram. But one big problem here is I only have visitor access. I don't want visitors to have or anonymous users to have access to this. So I need to add a new user type. And this is where we start getting into some of the more advanced functionality of codebots that we like to call behaviors. So I'm going to create an admin user, which is just another entity. My admin user with one special distinction here. This distinction is I'm going to add a user behavior. That's it. Moving across to my security diagram again, I can actually see I've got an admin user now. Adding all my create, read, update, and delete permissions for my admin. I want them to be able to do everything. I will also add an additional special property here, which is backend access, which gives them administrative rights over the application. I will now be able to actually log in and use it. However, I haven't got any pages. Jumping across to my user interface diagram. I'm going to create a home page. Mark it as my home page. I'm going to create a page for my species. And tanks. These pages are currently empty. They'll be blank. This will only give you your application routes. That's where we come to some of the building blocks of our UI. Tiles. For each of these pages, I'm going to simply be using one of our other behaviors, which is our CRUD behavior, which adds the ability to perform CRUD actions on one of these entities. So I'm going to call this one fish, and I'm going to pick my fish entity. Of course, one of the important things, or one of the important principles of codebots is the ability to actually add your own code alongside the bot written code. And to that purpose, you can add a custom tile to any of these pages that will allow you to add your own code. We'll talk about how that works a little bit more in a second. Species, again, just quickly adding a CRUD tile. Species. And tanks. Wonderful. You will notice we now have populated our security diagram with some pages. I will now allow admin read access to all of those. So since I've actually built up the core parts of my application, I can now move on to the special part, which is building. Hitting this build button will prompt me to select a Git repository. For the purpose of this, I will use the codebots repository to make it simple. But of course, you can link up your own GitHub or your GitLab or whatever repository service you currently use. What you'll see now is what we like to call our fireworks. So after this is validating our model, you'll see the fireworks. What this represents is the bot's actually running around your file system, creating each of these files. Every single node on this diagram either represents a folder or a directory or an individual file itself. Hovering over these, you can actually see that each of the little files that have been created for each of these nodes. And in your statistics down here as well, you can actually see this this application did just produce 92,000 lines of code, which you'd normally have to write by hand. For those who are a little bit more interested in the tech, we do actually have a developer console here that does actually feed all of the details back to us as users of what the bots are actually doing. And you can see it switching from one of the targets, whether it be a client side, server side, or test target in the developer console here. Now that we've built it, we might want to actually have a look at some of the actual code. So switching across again, I've opened, I built the original prototype here, which was exactly the same as what I just demoed. This is the code that what looks like in GitLab. So this example here is my fish entity in my server side. And as you can see, it's perfectly human readable code because this was based upon a reference implementation written by a developer. What I said before around making sure you can actually work alongside the bots, the concept we work with here is something called a protected region. And you'll see these scattered throughout the code base. Protected region tags, which are just very special comment tags. What they do is they actually allow us to turn on the protected region by toggling this off onto on, and then we can edit the code in between. Turning this protected region on will actually inform the bots that this code is now no longer theirs, and they can't touch it. So you can keep hitting that build button as many times as you want, and the bots won't change anything inside of this. If you wanted to reset back to the bot default, you can simply turn the protected region back off again, and the bots will overwrite your changes. I believe I did have another example here. Looks like I don't. With this one here, the code base, you can, if I switch over to the actual directory itself, you can see this follows your classical structure of a Java application as well. Into the actual directory itself, you do actually have access to the models themselves in their serialized format. So whether or not that be your entity, your security, or your UI. So if you want to do anything else with these models outside of the platform, you most definitely can. So you don't get lock-in. And these are represented as XML to do with as or pass as you please. Jumping back over to the platform again, I might have a look at one of the other stages in our development cycle. So opening up back my menu, we've had a look at the build. I'm now going to jump in and have a look at the test. My planning, sorry. And what I might do for this one, I might actually switch over to one of my other applications that I prepared earlier. Down here. And I've made a very simple couple of tickets in here. So your plan section, like I mentioned before, is the idea so you can actually complete everything within the portal. You don't have to, of course. There are plans to integrate this with Jira, as if you're using Jira or other popular services. But inside of here, you've got your typical Kanban style, where you've got your various columns, the defaults being to do, in progress, and done. Now that I've actually shown some cool tech, I think I might move that into done. Unfortunately, I'd already ticked off the Be Awesome one before I started today. So I'll leave that in done as well. The most important part about this plan section, which some people might question of why you've got this in here when there are other tools such as Trello and Jira, the most important part comes down to our testing. So the bots themselves, they produce not only the development target, so your client side and server side, they actually also produce your test target. And the test target comes in various forms. For example, in the code example and the project I just showed you here, you have a test target, which is your integration test. So that's your Selenium test against your actual full application. You will also have client-side unit tests that exist within the client side, and of course, server-side unit tests that exist within the server side. And they're all produced by the bots as well. On top of that, you can create additional UAT tests on the platform itself without touching any code. So I've got an example scenario here. Opening this up, I don't believe, I think most people here would probably be familiar with the various different texts that this comes from. So Scratch, it was the inspiration here to allow you to drag and drop different steps into your common behavior-driven testing. So your given, when, then. what we do here is we actually link up each of these tests to a story or a user story or task in our plan section, which then of course gives us our traceability. So traceability is probably my favorite part here, is it gives us a easily viewable section that gives us the details of what tickets are tested. As you can see here, my show call tech has no tests against it, versus ones that are tested. And it also gives us the number of tests that are actually passing. So this one, haven't run it. It's not tested, but it has a test. Going back to scenarios, I of course can run my test here. So this will kick off that test and it will start running against my target application. Our launch section, final part of the platform to really showcase here, is really simple. It allows us to actually progress a version of our application between the different stages. I can create a new build here, so we'll call it version 1. And this will actually tag my repository against that first build. But how I deploy that is completely up to me. That finishes up my little technical demo of the technology itself. I'd love to answer some questions. So if you have any questions, pop them through into the chat and we'll have a look at those afterwards. Otherwise, I might hand it back to you now, Geordie.
Cheers, thank you. All right, so what are the chances of you coming to work with us? For starters, if you understood what Kelly just said, that's a great indication. But otherwise, a really important part of not only our hiring process, but also just day to day in the office are our values. And this is, it goes across the whole East Cottage Industries family. We all value these certain things, or we all live by them. So to be able to deliver software urgently, but not in a rush state that we lose our quality, is really important. To be scientific, but not heartless, that's everything our tech is based on. Initiative, but not a lone wolf, makes you a really great team member when you're, always out seeing the opportunities that you can take, but not leaving the rest of the team behind. But most importantly, fun, but not unprofessional. We have a great relationship with each other, and that's probably one of the things I found working remotely from home. It's been great for being able to sit down and get stuff done at my computer, but I miss my team members, and it's always good to be in the office and see them. Jobs available at the moment. So we had 2 available, but the casual software dev role now is actually closed, thanks to the UQCS team for spreading the word. We've got some top candidates through this time around, which is great, and it seems like it's really cutthroat competition. So we appreciate the effort that you guys made, and a big thanks to MadHab for sending those applications through to our department and Aisha. But the role we do have available at the moment is a full-time DevOps engineer. So I was going to say it's not currently open to the public, but we are opening it up to you guys first. But it is, it's rare that we are hiring a full-time position or full-time DevOps position to be within the Rogue 2 team. So it'll be a really good opportunity if you are graduating this semester coming up and would like some experience in DevOps, would be awesome. So any applications, please send it all through to jobs@workingmouse.com, and you'll probably hear from the lovely Aisha. All right, we're up to question time. So I will check the chat and wait for anything to come through, but it looks like first off, we've got one from a lovely Joe Kong fellow that I'll answer. What inspired me to move to a product design role rather than just a pure UX role? Which, yeah, I definitely, from working with all of our clients, when you're working across different industries and businesses that are startups to government, what we're providing is not just a one-off application that they come and see us and they go off and they're on their own. What we do is really design the whole life cycle of their product, and that could take a lot of time to develop. But also some of these applications that we build has an impact on how they're marketed, or how they market their themselves out to the public as well. So that's why I mentioned earlier, we also offer static marketing sites as well. We may offer branding, photography or illustrations. So it's not just UX, what the designers do at our company. It is a product design role, which is awesome. I love that. I love being able to dabble in a few different areas. Kelly, I might shout this one over to you. We've got one from Zakona. How has working with designers influenced you as a developer?
Well, that's a good question. I actually love working with designers. So as a developer, it's probably one of the big things I noticed that I'm not that great at, is design, and it makes me very sad very often how terrible I am at it. And I do definitely appreciate the skill and effort that it takes to put a good design together. So technology and the code itself, of course, is only one side of the problem. The other side of course, is will someone actually use this, and will they enjoy using this? And typically without the design, the answer is no. I definitely, as influencing me as a developer, makes me think a lot more about the actual UX of what I'm developing, and makes me want to take on that design thinking sort of process as well, in bringing things together in a particular way, not just purely looking at it as a technical problem, which it very, very rarely is.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, but vice versa, in that unless we are offering a branding or illustrative exercise, it's rare that what you're doing is just a design problem. And you can always do with the insights of developers or account managers. They're always really helpful, especially when you're collaborating on really large projects. But the biggest thing working with developers for me is learning how to make my designs feasible and more cost effective for my clients as well. So sure, I can go off and design whatever they want, really, but you have to know how the technology works and how to best implement it. So yes, it can be a restriction sometimes, but it's also just a challenge to find the best solution. So working with the developers to understand the ins and outs of what we can offer and the tech has been so useful, and it helps me find patterns in my design, and I can tell when I am designing a component and when it can be reused, for example. So yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. We've got another one from Paul saying, what sort of concepts are covered in the way of working, which I can elaborate on a bit more. So yeah, basically, I mean, you can see that it is slightly thick, but basically it really is a go-to for how to execute any part of our process. So for example, if you are starting out a project in development, there's certain things that you need to go through. So iteration 0 is your first iteration on a development project, where you spend that time getting your development machine set up, making sure you build the model correctly on the codebots platform, and then everything is ready to start executing the first ticket that has come through from scope. So there's like a checklist in here to go through and make sure you followed that. Then when you have your planning meeting with clients, what you do in that. And then when you're in the day-to-day. So it outlines that. And I guess where it came from was we were at a point where like we were starting to find our feet, and we were having a cohesive process coming along, but it was very difficult without this to keep all of the teams on the same path. Yeah, you know, because we've got multiple development teams. They, you know, as soon as one takes a slightly different process, then you're providing something different for that client. So this just brings us all in line, and it's like bumper rails on a bowling alley, I suppose. You still have a lot of freedom within this because all of the problems that we solve are always different. And so you've got to have space to move and to be flexible for our clients, but it just provides that guidance.
I will actually add something to that, Geordie. So one of the things I find the most value out of the way of working and is in the fact it does detail a lot of those development steps in the process, in the journey of developing software. But it does it in such a way that we can hand a copy of our way of working over to clients we're working with to bring them on that journey with us. So a lot of the problems that we've experienced in the past is clients don't know how to develop software most of the time. And that's why they come to us. And one of the big problems with that, of course, is software isn't as simple as here's money, give me my software. There's so much in between those two ends. And what the way of working does is it is actually step out all the little details that need to be followed and need to happen in between. So we can bring them on that journey with us. And that's been hugely valuable in making sure we're managing and setting those correct expectations at the beginning of the process, as well as it helps them feel more involved and lets them participate in the actual journey that their software that they're paying for actually takes as well. So hugely important in that aspect. I believe you can actually get a copy of the way of working. Can you, Geordie?
Yeah, just download it from our website. You certainly can. And yeah, the other thing I was going to say too is that I've interviewed the developers in our teams as well, just to see how they find working within it. And the response was really positive in that they feel like they're supported having it there. It's not necessarily a list of rules that they must follow. It gives them the tool to communicate with our clients better, in that if clients are asking for too much, there's scope creep, or they've just added in a whole bunch of work, that book gives them the talking point to say, well, so following our process, the time for adding in or changing the scope comes on Monday when we reach our planning and review session. But for now, we just need to execute our iteration. And it also gives them the power to estimate correctly. I think that was another big one, that really big benefit that it brought them. Yes. So another question we have here, this is definitely a Kelly question. What is a developer workflow on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so this one's an interesting question because the developer workflow on a day-to-day basis does actually differ between the three companies within the group. If you're in Row 2, your workflow is going to be slightly different to if you're in WorkingMouse or if you're in codebots. So as Geordie mentioned right at the very beginning, I've been in WorkingMouse for almost 4 years now, and I've just recently switched to codebots. So I am very familiar with the differences between the two now, as far as the day-to-day for a developer. And then within WorkingMouse itself, depending on what you're doing at a particular time, the workflow can differ as well. So going from a purely developer role within a development pod, where you're actually producing the software within a sprint or an iteration, is different from being within the product success team and helping advise on scopes. For all the product success, what you're typically doing comes from that solution developer point of view. So your day-to-day will typically involve doing tech spikes, so exploring different technical solutions, de-risking things so we can get ready for estimation, so we're more confident on how long something will take, as well as advising your designer and your part of your team on whether or not some of their incredible designs are going to take 6 or 7 years to develop versus this tiny tweak that might take 2 seconds. So that's a developer workflow typically within product success. So a lot of documentation, a lot of technical spikes, and helping to communicate to clients actually what some of the technical challenges might be and where the challenges might not live as well. For working within a development pod, so that's actually producing your iterations, your piece of work at the end of an iteration, is what you'd probably more commonly expect from from your day-to-day, which would be working through various tickets. Of course, there's still a lot of involvement with your client with those different ceremonies. So your planning and review, you're involved. Your daily huddles, you're involved. And there's also a lot of collaboration with the other developers within WorkingMouse as well, with how you might go about solving certain problems. So in the morning, if I'm within a development pod, I typically grab a ticket. If I'm up to a new one, I have a look at it to see if I need to make any changes to my model, whether that be my security, my UI, or my entity diagram. I make those changes, pull down my code, and then I start working through it. Once you've done that, of course, you need to reach your definition of done for a particular ticket, which involves of course, it meets the acceptance criteria, first of all. Second of all, it's been tested. So that's not just smoke tested. Perhaps not you just going through clicking around. This is actually tested on our continuous integration service. And then, of course, that it's been code reviewed by typically the other member of your pod. So the other developer that you'll be working with. That's typically your day-to-day. Your tickets don't usually take more than 1 or 2 days at most each. But sometimes you might also be doing tech spikes during a development cycle as well. Within codebots is very much similar to how you'd be doing it within a development pod of WorkingMouse, in the fact you pick up a ticket and you'd be working through that process there. And then within Rogue 2, I believe that's probably the one I've got the least experience of. You'll typically do a lot of work assisting clients, whether it be an actual technical problem that they're having, where you jump into the code and you actually provide technical fixes or solutions, or if you're just guiding them on how to complete certain things within the software as well. So not every problem that comes through the Rogue 2 service desk is actually a bug. That's typical of your day-to-day between the different companies in my experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. So I think that reaches the end of the questions we have here, but there is a little bit of a lag on the live feed, so we might wait a few moments. But while we do, I'll just finish up and say that, yeah, if you have any more questions for us, please email through to info@WorkingMouse, or if you want to apply for that job position that we have available, email it to jobs@workingmouse.com.au. But otherwise, if you are ever in the Milton area, please come into Mongrel, because we're quite often at our local bar in the afternoons, so you can come and have a casual chat with us. But yeah, we have one more question before we go. Do you have any secret source examples for that 8% that you develop after the codebots are completed? That's a good question. So I'll say my part first. I guess the secret sauce is the extra parts that make the client's product custom to them or unique to them. So when we're designing their products, we try and utilize the behaviors that codebots has for us. So there's a forms behavior, there's a wizard, there's a CRUD tile. But when there is that level of customization for each client, so what we deliver to our clients doesn't look the same across all our projects. We're not an off-the-shelf system that everyone gets a cookie cutter design. They get a custom design that leverages those behaviors, but the developers get to customize that extra 8% and make projects unique. But I might throw to Kelly.
So the extra special sauce or the secret sauce example. So I've got nothing on hand right now that I can sort of show up, rather than probably referring to some of the projects that Geordie showcased earlier. You look at the differences between them, and the fact I believe a couple of those are actually available to jump on and have a look at, aren't they, Geordie?
Yeah, definitely. Suzanne Stays is a customer-facing project, and Morton Island Adventures is too.
Cool. So you can see the sort of the key differences between those ones. The extra 8%, and the reason we say 92% on average is some applications are very straightforward, very much fit within the patterns that codebots produces, and sometimes you get anywhere up to like 98% of bot-written code at the end. Sometimes you also get an application that might only use 80% of bot-written code, and there's a huge amount of custom code included in there as well. And what I typically find from a development perspective is majority of that code typically sits on the client side of your application. The server side, it's pretty much almost 100% bot written almost all the time. And that provides all of your programming interfaces, all of your GraphQL APIs, your REST APIs, all of your data layer, all of that sort of stuff that you need to do to interact with your database and interact with your typical CRUD actions, your security, all of that sort of stuff doesn't change much. What changes and what typically is that extra 8% is the business processes of how the individual clients interact with their software. So what one business does is completely different from what another does. And that will involve typically customizations to some of the existing tiles that codebots provides, whether that be a forms tile or a CRUD tile, or in some cases, completely custom tiles that have wild third-party integrations with potentially whether it be different validation services. Some projects encounter more interesting things as well, such as machine learning in some cases. And that sort of integration with either be emerging technologies or just varying business processes typically accounts for the entirety of that extra special sauce. So the bots, I think this is a follow-up question that sort of works really well into what I was just saying. So do you think using bots will eliminate or reduce software jobs in the future? My answer is no. I don't expect the bots will ever produce 100% of a target application. It is not the plan for the bots to ever produce 100% of a target application, simply because to solve that problem, you start getting diminishing returns. The more, I believe there's a book that Evan has actually published that's available on the CodeBots website that talks about this a little bit. There's a particular paradox that the more you try to make your model match your target application, the more complexity you introduce. We don't want to hit that. We want to find that sweet spot where you can model as much as possible without actually causing yourself more pain. So the bots will always require, in almost every single scenario, will almost always require developers to work on. You'll just get better quality software faster. You won't have less development jobs, I don't believe.
Yeah, I concur. And same with designers as well. Again, we don't want to be creating experiences that look exactly the same for all of our clients. So there will always be a need for creativity, and the level of problem solving that we do on a day-to-day basis, I just don't see a bot being able to do.
The development you end up doing when you're working with a codebot is just more interesting. You're not doing the same stuff every day. The stuff the bots do, which accounts for the 98%, is the stuff you would do on every single application. It's the stuff you'd have to create every single time for every app. The bots do all of that for you, so you can work with the fun stuff straight away.
Totally. Awesome. All right. I think we might wrap it up there. Looks like we got it all. Thank you for joining us, guys, and hope to meet some of you in person soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Geordie and Kelly, for your time tonight. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone in the audience appreciates it as well. Hope everyone in the audience learned something cool about WorkingMouse and what they do. Don't forget, on Saturday night at 7 p.m, we are watching Catch Me If You Can for movie night. All the details are in the Slack and on our Facebook. And next Tuesday at 5 p.m, we have our treasurer and resident quizmaster, Bradley, giving a talk about contributing to open source with our lovely UQCS bot. Thanks everybody for watching, and hope to see you next time.